Welcome to Unleashed at Work and Home, the show dedicated to helping veterinarians, vet techs, dog trainers, shelter and rescue workers, pet sitters, and all the other animal crazy pet professionals manage their stress and find more joy. I'm your host, Colleen Pilar, and I'm thrilled you're here with us today. Make sure you hit the subscribe button on your favorite app so that you won't miss a single episode. This episode is brought to you by our free community, the Circle of Resilient and Thriving Pet Professionals. If you like the ideas shared here, then you're invited to continue the conversation with other lifelong learners in the community. You can find out more at colleenpilar.com. It's the perfect place for you to learn cool stuff, feel good, and take action to create the life you love. Come join us. Welcome back to Unleashed at Work and Home. My guest today is Debbie Martin. And I started right before hitting record and I said to her, "So Debbie, what do I call you?" Because Debbie is a licensed veterinary technician with a specialty in behavior. And she's also a Karen Pryor training academy graduate. I've just swabbled over that. But when she answered the question, she said that being a veterinary technician who specializes in behavior is a lot like being a psychiatric nurse, which I thought was awesome. So let's just start right there. What's it like to be kind of a psychiatric nurse for animals?
Well, it is multifaceted because you're there for the animals, right? To help them with their relationships, maybe that they have with their owners for sure, the pet guardian that is bringing them to see you. But then also you're kind of there for the human part of the equation as well, because they're the ones that bring the pet in, and it is working on that kind of dynamic. The relationship is a lot of relationship building, whether you're working in severe behavior disorders or animal training, preventive type things, doesn't matter, or even just veterinary care. Like it really is about that human component. But when you're dealing with mental health disease in a dog or a cat, which is where my specialty is, owners and guardians can have a lot of guilt around that, feeling that maybe they are responsible, that they have somehow caused this. And certainly as professionals in behavior, we know that sometimes we can exacerbate issues, but we usually don't cause them. It's not, and oftentimes I will point out to people, well, you've had 10 other dogs in your lifetime, and you never had this problem before.
Yeah.
And you're not raising them any differently than the other dogs in the past. So, really kind of helping them during this difficult time helps the pet as well. And so kind of figuring out that component and working in the veterinary field, we talk about in a textbook that I'm co-editor and a contributing author on, about being the case manager. So as a veterinary technician, I kind of play that role of being the go-between between the pet owner and the veterinarian, or the animal professional working with that pet and the veterinarian, so kind of keeping everyone in the loop and up to date. So a lot of communication.
A lot. And so valuable. What's particularly reinforcing about being the person who makes sure that everyone is in the loop and everyone knows what they need to know?
I would say the relationships that you build. Well, I have a lot of clients that I've seen them through multiple dogs, not just like they started out with one dog. That dog lived, to be 13, 14 years old, passed from natural causes or cancer or something, not behavioral issues oftentimes. And then they've gotten another pet and they've identified some kind of issue that they want to work on. So kind of this relationships that can be developed with some of the clients, not all of them. Sometimes, you see them one or two times and that's it. But others, long timers, is that bond that you have with them. And the appreciation that they have for your assistance. I think that is a big motivator for me.
Yeah. So I'm picturing 10-year-old Debbie, who was dreaming of becoming a psychiatric nurse for animals and being the case manager, because I mean, that's a pretty common 10-year-old dream. Is that true? Is that what you were thinking when you were 10, that that's what you would be doing with your life?
Definitely not. I loved animals. Like I remember I grew up with long-haired dachshunds.
Mm-hmm.
And I would dress up the dachshunds in clothes and all kinds of, except for the little male dachshund. He doesn't appreciate that, and so I understood that. Our little female, though, she was very
Did
tolerant.
you explain that to yourself of that it was because he was male, or it was just because he was who he was?
He was who he was.
Okay.
But what was interesting is I always played a teacher role when I would play like adult, I would be the teacher. I would have homework assignments for my friends, and like I would pretend I was teaching. And my first career before I went back to school to be a veterinary technician was actually I was a preschool teacher.
Were you?
My education in undergrad, and I was working towards a master's degree too, in human relations and child development and teaching.
Okay, so from my background and my experience, I think there is just extraordinary, tremendous overlap between human development and dog behavior. So to really focus on being a preschool teacher and communicating things in ways that children can understand seems like an extraordinary asset to the career you have now. Do you agree? Do you see overlap, or do you see them as quite different?
Oh, definitely. And I think that's why I gravitated towards animal behavior when I got into the veterinary field. I mean, I loved all the, cool stuff that we were doing and surgeries and the nursing care, IV catheters, drawing blood, taking care of ill animals and nursing them back to care. But I also was very interested in, can we affect their development like we can with children? There's this genetic component that we know, but then there's such a huge environmental component. And I fell into, like, just shortly after getting out of school, it was my second or third year out of technician school, I was working at a practice, and there was a technician there who was going on maternity leave, and she was teaching some puppy classes at the hospital, and she asked if I would take them over. I was like, sure, okay, that sounds interesting. Tell me what you're doing. And there we go. There became the hook. I was definitely caught by that, and it just made so much sense to me that there are developmental stages, and they mimic human ones, but they're so short. Such a small window, which is good and bad.
Yeah.
But that is where I definitely got into behavior, was preventive teaching puppy classes in a general veterinary practice. That was back in 1997.
I know, it's funny to look back on some of the numbers, isn't it? And be like, oh, okay, I guess that was not yesterday. Somehow it feels like yesterday. What inspired the shift from being a preschool teacher to getting into the veterinary world?
Yeah, so I had thought about being a veterinarian when I was in school, in elementary school and high school. I went to an all-girls private school. It wasn't a religious denomination. It was just a private school. And it was very driven, and like I had never taken a multiple choice test until I got to college, because everything was like you just had to come up with the answers. And so to say I was slightly burned out by the time I graduated from high school was an understatement. I actually was feeling pretty burned out, and the thought of going to school for 8 years to become a veterinarian was like, no, thank you. So I was like, well, I'll just take some classes. And I started taking classes, and it was the psychology ones that I was like, this is interesting. And so I gravitated towards those courses and got a degree. But I knew before I was done with undergrad that I still wanted to work with animals. And I was volunteering at a vet hospital.
Really?
And so then once I graduated, I worked for a couple of years as a preschool teacher. I took another job that paid more money so that I could save some money to go back to school. And I wasn't sure if I would go to vet school or if I would become a nurse or a veterinary technician. And after looking into it, the technician felt like that was me. That was the route I wanted to go.
And that was you. Why? What are the pieces that really appealed to you about going the technician route?
It was the more hands-on with the animals, probably. And then the combination, being able to educate pet owners as well as actually do the nursing care. Whereas the veterinarian, their role becomes they have to make the diagnosis. They tell you the technician which tests to run, and they interpret those things and they communicate with the client, but they don't have as much hands-on care generally if they're utilizing their veterinary technicians appropriately, but they don't have that hands-on care, which is something that was still important to me.
Yeah.
And that's the same like when I went into the behavior field. I still wanted to work with the patients as opposed to just being the clinician who is looking at the history, doing the diagnostics and giving a diagnosis and treatment plan. I wanted to help the clients implement that.
Which is where the magic really occurs, because we've all seen a treatment plan that was not implemented because there were speed bumps in it that could have been overcome, but they didn't know how to overcome. And so then, we've all had that. Like,
yeah,
I have that with like a habit I'm trying to develop. And so I'm like, what are the pieces that I need to shift for myself to be able to make this more likely? And when you talk about that with helping the people implement these plans, the success or failure, their feelings about whether things worked or not relies so heavily on their own ability to take action on what was advised. And that is often very, very hard to take action on what is advised because it requires pretty significant shifts in just our ways of being within an environment, of little things like that. What do you think helps people knowing that they have you there as the case manager, the one to help them through it? What do you think is the kind of help they need most often to be able to support their animal in the way their animal needs?
And actually, I think that this rolls right into a new service I'm getting ready to provide. I will say, so I had taken a break from working with cases been working on writing a course for Fear Free for almost 5 years now, but the last 2 required us to stop taking new cases. And so, really just to kind of finish up that coursework. It's a canine and feline veterinary behavior course that's going to be launched later, some of it later this year and then into next year. But what I started thinking about as I'm coming back to working with clients again is what is it that really makes me happy to do? And then also is very beneficial for the pet owner that's trying to implement a treatment plan. So I'll be offering a new service where once someone has a prescribed treatment plan, I'm going to coach them through implementing it into their life. Like they've got 3 kids, they've got 2 other dogs, and they have a cat, and they have a husband, whatever, there's all kinds of things going on. So by meeting with them twice a week, and just, we're just going from day to day. Like for the next 3 days, I want you to do this. Like, where do you have 5 minutes where you can have 20 treats ready? You're going to do this specific exercise. And then we'll discuss how that went when we regroup in 3 days. And then from there, we build and really just helping them taking this treatment plan that they've been provided by a veterinary behaviorist or veterinarian that they're working with and applying it within their household.
That sounds awesome. Step.
Yeah.
That sounds fantastic. Because the big theme in my work is helping people find the things that work for them. And And so much of, mental health advice sounds like here's what will work for you. And then it doesn't. And then the people beat themselves up for it. But to say, here's what works for many people, and this is why, like, this is what we're looking for. And so how can we head toward those benefits within your life, your desires, your, preferences? So I remember I got a dog when I had a 7-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 2-year-old. And I distinctly, 100% clearly remember a conversation with my sister in which I said to her, I know what I would tell clients to do in this situation. And I hear myself, butting myself. Yeah, but I can't do that because, but I can't do that because. And so it was like an out of body experience for me of, I knew the good advice. I'd given the good advice to so many people. And I had 100 reasons why it wasn't good advice for me. My own advice to myself in my household was not good advice for me. Just because of the ripples of, these are living beings. So if you're in a house with more than one pet, more than one human, more than one adult, more than one child, more than one species, when we say, okay, do this 5 times a day, there's just an assumption that all other variables have been managed. No toddler is running into the room while you do that. No bird is squawking when you're working on noise sensitivity, whatever the thing. So this plan that you have of meeting with people twice a week sounds, really heavenly in so many ways, because it's like, what do we really, really, really need to focus on now? And let's get those pieces in play so that they work for that person in that household, that person and pet, and all of the other members of that household for 3 days. And then we'll either build on it or we'll be like, well, that didn't work.
Exactly.
And so now what do we need to focus on?
Hopefully they'll feel comfortable enough to be honest with, I didn't do it. And I will preface that in the beginning. I understand life happens. It's our goal, but if it's not achieved during the next 3 days, that's okay.
Yeah.
We'll just revisit it again and see what changes we can make. Of course, doing a model like this really limits the number of clients that you can help. It also, because of the time, and then also it's limiting, which I don't like about this. The limiting factor is also they have to be able to afford it.
Yeah.
And so that sometimes, I've worked on other projects to help people have more accessibility at a cheaper rate for behavior issues. So I'm working on a project that's a startup company that just launched this year that is providing something like that. So that makes me feel better. I'm working on this, so people who can't afford to hire me to help them for X amount of dollars, there's this other alternative that will at least will give them good information and steer them in the correct direction.
Yeah.
But that is hard. It's hard because you're making a decision, but also you're also thinking about your own emotional welfare. Because, certainly I think seeing case after case after case where you're not doing enough follow-up, you feel like you're giving them information, but what's happening and you stop caring about what's happening. It's just, here's the service. We're going to give it to you and do with it what you will.
Yeah.
That model doesn't work for me anymore. I've done it in the past, but out of necessity, I think. And then also just you get in a rut. You want to help you feel like you're helping more people that way, but you're not maybe doing the service that feels right for you.
That is such a common experience for pet professionals where it does start to feel that there's a bit of a rut and a little bit of an emotional protection and distancing of like, okay, here's the stuff, but I'm not going to allow myself to invest or get fully emotionally into this. And it's a hard line. It's a hard line for us to know where our responsibility ends and where it where it's enough. We've done enough. We've done our part. This is my part to do, and I need to do my part well. But I also need not to be so negatively affected by doing my part that I cannot do this long term. What have you found to be true about that, about protecting your own emotional space, but still showing up in a way that feels right and true to you?
I think what I have done, I don't know for sure, but I think what I have done is I have diversified my job description.
Mm.
I really, because we were talking just before we started to record, like, what is it I do? Well, I kind of have I feel like I have 4 job descriptions. I help clients with their pets, with a treatment plan that's been prescribed for them. But then I also am an author and a writer of content. So an educator in that way. I do public speaking, which I also really enjoy, and educating other educators. So that's really mostly where I've done my public speaking is within either the veterinary community or the animal training field. In fact, there was a time when in the veterinary community, behavior was not received as well. And I kind of focused more on animal trainers and animal training through Clicker Expo and that kind of stuff. But I will say, since Fear Free actually launched, behavior is more readily accepted within the veterinary field. And so my passion is going back that way again, being able to get animal behavior and into the veterinary professionals' mindset is something that I think is needed and also very rewarding for me, just because I identify in both fields as an animal trainer as well as a veterinary professional.
And it matters so much that the perception of behavior and the value of doing that kind of work is shifting within the veterinary community. That it really is starting to be recognized so much more as true valuable veterinary care, which it wasn't always.
Right. I think it mimics the human health field too.
Oh,
right?
for sure.
The veterinary field tends to be sometimes ahead of the game, but sometimes, oftentimes a decade or so behind.
Yeah.
And so it's changing for sure. And then the fourth thing, there was 4. I act as a subject matter expert for content that is being put out there, mainly for Fear Free and Fear Free Happy Homes, but I've done it for other companies too. And that's really fun, actually, because I get to review content for that it stays in line with their philosophy as far as animal welfare and animal emotions. But then also I get to learn other things at the same time. It's like reading blogs and information about other topics that I'm not as knowledgeable about. So that's kind of a win-win for me, is continuing my education, which will never end.
Yes.
and but then also having that filter on, as far as how we phrase things, and also if we're talking about some kind of medical treatment, how is that discussed as far as application? Is it emotionally protective for the animal?
Yeah. So I'm curious if you'll play with me. And if you don't want to, we'll just cut this out. But I'm wondering if I could ask you about each of those 4 areas, and if you could, off the top of your head, tell me something it gives you, which you kind of did a little bit, but so we'll just dive right in. So, being a subject matter expert, what's something that gives you?
Further education, and also being able to apply my behavior knowledge in a variety of different contexts, which is kind of like generalizing behavior. When we're talking about training animals, it's generalizing my behavior about the welfare of animals, but to people, and then to different specialties as well.
Awesome. Thank you. And when you're an author, what does that give you?
That's a hard one. Education, being an author is really, it's one of those love-hate things. Like, it can be so hard. Like, I always notice before I sit down to write, like, the house has to be clean, the laundry needs to be done. Like, there are so many things that have to happen for the environment to feel right. It may be procrastination, but it is that feeling of producing something, I guess, that is not quick. Like, I love my checklist. I'm very much a checklist person. For like having lots of things I can mark off my checklist every day. But writing is one of those things that oftentimes it could be several days before anything gets checked off. Like if you're working on a certain section. So I guess it's that commitment to a longer term project and just that ability to focus on it.
Thank you. And as a public speaker, what does that give you?
Adrenaline. Actually, I think that's really what it is. It's the adrenaline. The thing I love about public speaking is generally when people are coming to a talk you're giving, it's because they're interested in something and they want to learn. And the difference between working with pet owners that have a dog or a cat that is doing something they don't like is they're coming to you out of necessity, not because they want to learn something new. They want you to fix something. So when I'm public speaking, I feel like a lightness about it because it's sharing, it's giving information to people that are then also going to take it out and give it to other people. So it's this ripple effect I feel that is happening as well. So a combination of things. One, they're there because they want to learn. And two, you impart information that can then go to other people.
Yeah, that's super valuable. And then finally, the technician role. What does that give you?
Yeah, so that is, again, it's the relationship with the pets as well as with the clients. When I was teaching puppy classes in general practice, I would actually have pet owners that would schedule their dogs like spay or neuter surgery on the day I was the surgery technician. They didn't care which doctor was doing the surgery, but they knew me and they knew I knew their dog. And they trusted me to care for them in a special way. And so those relationships were invaluable and very rewarding.
Awesome. So now, just because I'm pushing my limits here, I'd like to read these back to you.
Okay.
And I want you to tell me what you notice. And it doesn't matter what you notice, but just anything that comes to your mind when I share some of these thoughts back to you. So as a subject matter expert, it's an opportunity for deeper education and also a chance for you to apply the knowledge you've gathered in different contexts. As an author, you're creating something, you're producing something that didn't exist before. There's a before and an after for sure. And it's not quick. It's something that requires your commitment and focus. As a speaker, there's a sense of adrenaline, and the people there are interested. They really want to learn. There's not a forced necessity that causes them to be there. And that experience creates a lightness in you, and it's a sharing that has a ripple effect out far beyond that one presentation that you've done. And then as a vet tech, you get to connect and have relationships with people and pets, individual relationships that matter and last over time. And when you hear all of that, what comes to mind?
Yeah. The diversity of it, I think, balances things out. Like if I was just reading content and applying my knowledge, that would be lonely, right? There's not as much interaction. If I was just doing public speaking, I feel like I may not be taking in as much information or learning as many new things. If I was just writing, also, again, lonely because it's usually something you're doing by yourself. And so then the client part is adding in that relationship part that balances it. But I also think the reason I don't just do that part is because of the burnout that you can experience with just dealing with people's problems, basically, like their challenges in their life. And that can be overwhelming because as a person that tries their best to be compassionate, it can slip into taking over your kind of ability to cope as well.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And not everyone can necessarily get all of these needs met through 4 different jobs like you've done, but to recognize that if there is a need that's not being met and finding a way to meet it, even outside of our jobs, can help to provide some of that balance. As you were talking about how the diversity and the pieces fit together so nicely, it made me think of the words that you shared. And I always ask guests to share words that matter to them. And the words you shared are, you are exactly where you need to be, and you are exactly who you need to be. And I have a million questions, but I'm going to just start with, what does that mean to you?
Yeah. I would say for me, it is a reminder that even if we have, I don't want to call them mistakes, but we have done things differently in our past than we would do now, that makes it part of who we are and has shaped our learning and our experiences. And that's okay. So I will share that I am a recovering or perfectionist. Like, really, it is a work in progress. And so this is something that has really helped me with that, is the acceptance of, knowing that I'm doing the best that I can with the knowledge and information I have at this time, at the time, and that I am continually trying to not necessarily do better, but just find ways to integrate those thoughts and feelings into everything that I do, not just, practices that I do to help with my own mental health or stress levels, but to make it apply throughout my life. And that quote comes from, I heard it from Sarah Beth Yoga. I started to do yoga in let's see, when was it? 2019? Yes, it was 2019. It was on my birthday, 2019. And I had a series of events happen with my parents, actually, that led me to seek out yoga. I had been looking for something for years, I would say. So I was 49. That was my 49th birthday in 2019. And I had been looking for something that could help me be present in the moment. I tend to be a planner. And maybe that's why all of my things that I do tend to be work related, right? But I would always I struggled in my early 40s with, how do you just sit and enjoy a meal with friends without constantly be thinking about, okay, next week I've got to go here and I need to get these clothes, or what am I going to wear to that? Just constantly planning, never being able to just shut the brain off. And so the way I started to deal with that was actually doing hobbies that made it so I had to focus on the hobby so much. But maybe that wasn't I was really just kind of putting a Band-Aid on it. So my hobbies were things like mountain biking, dirt bike riding a motorcycle on the street. These are things that you can you can die or seriously hurt yourself if you're not paying attention to what you're doing. So you can't really be thinking about what clothes you're going to pack for your trip next week. And I found those adrenaline seeking hobbies a way to shut my brain off, so to speak, but I really wasn't. I was just masking the fact that I couldn't find peace in the present. And so my mom had a stroke in 2019. She was living with me at the time. she already had some mild dementia before the massive hemorrhagic stroke. And what I found was it was amazing to me how quickly she was able to recover with physical therapy because she had done yoga for the last 2 decades. And she was in good physical shape, coming into that stroke. And so it was an eye-opener to me. And then also just thinking about the fact that I need to find a way to decrease my stress levels. So I was like, let's try yoga. That's what mom did. It seemed to help her, put her in good mobility and good shape for being able to recover from a traumatic event like that. And so that's where I started to learn to be able to sit and focus on the presence and now, and learn that uncomfortable emotions can come up, and that's okay. We can work through those. And then in 2022, I started a daily meditation practice. And that is the opposite of dirt bike riding. You are sitting.
It is the opposite.
Yeah, and it's so much more beneficial for me at this time in my life. Like, I really don't want to get hurt on a dirt bike anymore. Like, things can break too easily at my age. I don't want that to happen. So meditation is safer and seems to be much more effective for me as a stress reliever. Because the problem I find with public speaking is another one, but also these adrenaline-filled situations or hobbies that I had was that there is a cortisol letdown a couple of days or a day later where you feel kind of wrung out.
Yeah.
And exhausted. And I don't have that when I do yoga or meditation. I feel more energized and present and able to appreciate things in the moment much more.
Yeah. I think that's beautiful. Super helpful. I'm hoping the habit I'm actually trying to develop is a yoga or something. It's on my own. It's my goal is like to go in my basement where I have everything I need and just do it. But so far I haven't done that. But I did create a meditation practice sort of accidentally many years ago. And a couple weeks ago, my mom and brother were here visiting, and we were on the highway, and I was one lane over from a semi, and a car came up behind the semi and decided to cut in front of me to get ahead of the semi. So they had seen me the whole time. They knew I was there. There was not physically enough space for this car to get through, but they just took it. And after my mother talked for 3 days, but definitely for the next 30 minutes of what a close call that was. And it was a super close call. It absolutely 100% was. And what I was aware while driving along was I was fine. Like I was like, oh. And then after the oh, I was just back to driving. But her body was not. And I thought, well, what's different? Because I'm the one driving, and maybe she was on that side, so she saw it differently. But I think it's the meditation. Like, how does meditation help you? I don't know, because usually it's boring and I get distracted. And also, if you try to kill me on a highway, I can be like, oh, yeah, that happened, and just keep driving home without. And it was such a funny thing. But I think for me, that was evidence to me that this daily meditation practice that has developed over time, that I would not in any way consider to be good. Like, I do not stay focused. Sometimes
that's what meditation's about, right? You're supposed to, like, your brain, your brain doesn't shut down. Your brain gets distracted and you come back. That's successful meditation. Recognizing that for the past 10 minutes, I've been thinking about, something else that I'm going to do later today.
Yep.
I'm going through my to-do list, and that you recognized it is being in the present moment. So that's successful meditation. That's what I've learned. And so, I was like, how do you turn your brain off? Oh, you don't. I get it. You don't.
You don't. You don't. But you also don't have to be irritated with yourself and judging yourself for the fact that you did not successfully turn your brain off, because guess what? Brains aren't designed to be turned off.
No.
But when I first started meditating, I was just like, it was painful and uncomfortable. And I would have a notepad next to me for all the ideas of things that I was so sure I would forget, like, oh my gosh, I forgot I need to order more dog food. And since then, I've been able to at least trust that the part of my brain that needs to remember I need to order more dog food will remember that later when I'm actually on my computer. But it's an interesting experience. So this quote about you're exactly where you need to be and you're exactly who you need to be, I think those are so valuable individually because so many of us think I'm not where I need to be. There is a place that I should be that I am not. And it might be physical in that moment of like, I should be here, but I've chosen to be here. Or it may be more metaphorical. Like at this stage in my life, this is what I thought. And that's not what's happening. But also the who. You're exactly who you need to be. Does either half of this ring stronger for you? You're exactly where you need to be. You're exactly who you need to be. And when I say, does it ring stronger for you? I mean, stronger for you today in this exact moment, because the answer might be different tomorrow.
Yeah. I would say probably the where.
The where.
Strings is stronger for me. And I don't know if it may be a combination of it's in the yoga practice that I do. She says that more often than the second part. And I also have some t-shirts that say, you're exactly where you need to be. And so that may be part of it. And for me, maybe it's easier for me to look at kind of like the where versus who, because that's more looking internally at me, which is a bigger microscope that I'm trying to squirm away from. I'm like a vampire staying out of the light.
I love that.
Little bit.
What an image.
Yeah.
And when you know you're exactly where you need to be, how does that knowing affect you?
It brings peace and tranquility, and I think it's really, for me, it's a reminder to be in the present, like the where you need to be is, so I'm exactly where I need to be at this moment, right? This is for me going forward, or not even looking forward. See, that is the challenge of being in the now, right? Like oftentimes our brain is so wired to be either in the past or in the future, but not right here. Sometimes we can be right here thinking about those things, right? That's the now, but really focusing on the moment, this discussion, us talking, us seeing each other because we're on Zoom, hearing things in the background, but really tuning those out and focusing on the discussion, I think, is exactly where I need to be right now.
Yeah. And I'm so grateful that you are. I'm so happy you're here. So if people wanted to learn more about you and your work, how could they do that?
Yeah, they can find me at my website. So there's 2 pages you can go to. One is teamanimalbehavior.com. And within that, there's another one. It's DebbieMartinABC.com. And the ABC stands for Animal Behavior and Coaching. So
awesome.
DebbieMartinABC.com.
And I will link to both of those in the show notes so that people can find you.
Great.
Thanks so much for talking with me today, Debbie. It was such a pleasure. And for letting me play games with you and go off on tangents that aren't my typical tangents.
Love it. It was fun.
Thanks for listening to Unleashed at Work and Home. I invite you to come learn more at ColleenPilar.com, where you can be steady, be strong, and be long.